in the US, kids growing up, 11 and 13 years old, and they watch the WNBA more than the NBA.
Talking to different football clubs, talking to 3 different football leagues. They want to crack the US market.
They don't love the fake football that we get in the summer. I got a call from somebody here saying, why is the coach wearing a camera on his head? Like, this feed is very shaky. What is this?
That has been one of the most brutal moments in football history. Hello and welcome to a new episode of Gameday. Today from a special place. We are in the US, we're in New York, here in Manhattan. Ben, thank you for joining us and for telling us a little bit about your view of the industry.
Absolutely. Always great to see you. Glad you're here in New York. Happy to do it.
Yeah, it's been a while, since I was last here. So, we used to work together. We had a wonderful time at Meta, working on the sports rights when we were doing those deals. Tell a little bit about yourself to start with, and tell the audience what you've been up to lately.
Yeah, absolutely. I started my career 20 years ago. Hate to admit that, but 2 decades in the media industry. I've always been fascinated with content distribution, sports. I grew up as a kid consuming obviously a lot of sports, particularly actually European sports, football. Recording games on VCRs and trying to watch the one game a week. And so I always was curious about content and started my career at Comcast, the cable company. This is before they owned NBC, before they owned Sky. So it was really on the content distribution side, the cable side. Then was in media sales for a long time. I was at the Wasserman Agency representing properties in rights negotiations and doing deals for primarily U.S. sports, but also some international properties as well. Then was fortunate enough to get on the Facebook Sports job train with you and Peter and Melissa and Reese and so many other people, great people that we worked with. Leo, Joey, we could go on and on. For those 5 years when Facebook was buying sports rights, and had a great time there. Learned a lot. Learned what it was like to be inside a big tech company that doesn't necessarily understand the sports landscape quite as well as some of us. We had some great times there. And for the past almost 2 years, I've been now head of content acquisition at FanDuel Sports Network here in the United States. We have 15 regional sports networks. We have a direct consumer business, rights to 30 NBA, MLB, and NHL teams. Also building a portfolio of other sports rights and trying to figure out the future of media one day at a time here in the United States.
That's interesting topic, and I think something that everyone is trying to figure out now in the sport industry. I have to say, for Ben's credit, that he's one of the few people in the US that understand international sport and understand international audiences, because one of the biggest challenges that I found in working for an American company coming from international is that it's very hard to get their head outside of the pure US sports.
That's right. I mean, I have to, I guess, brag a little bit. I lived in Madrid. I studied there. I was a socio for Atleti, not Real Madrid, but I lived near the Calderón, the old stadium. I do love and appreciate, European sports. But the US is such a different marketplace. We have 4 time zones. We have so many pro leagues. We have regional and local networks that don't really exist in Europe. We also have a big college sports industry that really doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, I don't think, where so much value, so much media rights dollars go to college American football, college basketball, college women's basketball, that doesn't really exist anywhere else. And so I learned a lot from you and all the others too. I now, understand the value of cricket and the audiences. And, I know we met Sir Andrew Strauss at one point, all the Americans. We had no idea who that was at that offsite. Now I do know who he is.
Well, to be honest, I didn't have a clue. I actually remember when we did this meeting that I took the stage to explain to all the Americans the rules of cricket that I learned the day before in the pub with Reese Beer telling me how it was after a few pints. So it was a real... One of the highlights of my time at Meta was being able to explain to the whole team what I learned from Riz on the cricket rules, for sure.
Yeah, a good education for all of us. And yeah, the business is fascinating, market by market, region by region, globally. it's really, really fascinating to me. And my current role is really US focused, but obviously worked globally with Wasserman and with Facebook Meta for those years.
And you mentioned the regional networks, the national networks. The US has a really different media landscape. How is that landscape? How you would explain that media landscape to someone that is from outside the US and is working in the sport industry?
Yeah, so the US, because it is so vast and has so many teams, it really has been divided up into different territories. And so the example I'll use is if you live in Miami, you watch the Miami Heat games, the basketball team, on my channel on FanDuel Sports Network, Florida. So you watch them every night, night in, night out. Their games are on my channel. But then ESPN, which is a national television network, also has Miami Heat games. They might have 5 to 10 a year, but my channels have 60 to 70. So my games are available in the state of Florida for people in Miami to watch. ESPN is a national network similar to a Sky in the UK, and they're available across the country. But my networks show the local teams in their cities night in, night out for fans. So it'd be as if Real Madrid had their own channel that only showed their games in Madrid, but not the rest of the country. So it's very different than the way territories and broadcasting rights are divided up in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, in Europe, if you think about it, Texas is as big as Spain, if it's bigger in terms of extension and population. And the broadcaster you have in Spain has nothing to do with the broadcaster you have in France or in Germany. But here, sometimes when you look at the US from outside, you see a single big market. Similarly to the US, when they look at Europe, they see a single market when in reality it's over 50 markets with different cultures, different languages, but you can see, I think it's easier to see the difference in Europe because you really have a lot of languages and real differences than in the US where you don't really feel it.
That's right. Yeah, our channels could almost be the equivalent of like the EBU that has local channels, affiliates in each territory where they show some of the rights that they have. And so you're right. It's a very different kind of model, a different kind of structure than each country having their own national channels. Just the US is so vast. There's so many games. I mean, my company, FanDuel Sports Network, we do 4,000 live games a year across professional collegiate sports. So that's a lot of games every night. There's days where we have 9 to 10 live games a night that are shown in different parts of the country. So lots of production, lots of resources, lots of viewership, when you aggregate it all together. It's a pretty vast broadcasting enterprise.
And your main content is let's say the top leagues, no? NBA, NFL, MLB?
And NBA, NHL, and MLB. So we don't have NFL rights, but we have the other 3 big leagues. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And outside of the big tier 1, what other sports are you looking at?
Yeah, this has really been something I've tried to build up over the past, almost 2 years I've been here. I'd say we're really focused on 3 areas. One is we are looking at international rights to different properties. And so, that's things like British basketball we had to deal with a few years ago, things like the pro triathletes, the Euro League, where we can fill additional hours of the day or afternoon time slots, weekend time slots with great content from properties, in our core sports. So obviously we have NBA rights. So other European basketball ties in nicely with the rights that we have in basketball. The second vertical is women's sports. We've built a really strong women's sports portfolio. Since I got here, I've added, I think, 300 plus live games from NWSL, which is the pro women's football league here, WNBA, which has been absolutely massive. If anybody follows that, I mean, the revenue increases, the ad revenue, the viewership have been staggering for us the past few years. We have some of Caitlin Clark's games with the Indiana Fever. She's arguably one of the most visible, women's athletes in the world.
Probably the most visual. It's hard to think. Yeah, it's hard to think about someone else.
Yeah, she's been amazing. We also have PWHL, which is a women's ice hockey league.
Yeah.
In volleyball, we have Athletes Unlimited, which is done phenomenal for us. So we've built a really strong women's portfolio across our networks. And then the third bucket is, this will be familiar to you from kind of my Facebook days, is some niche sports, some different properties, things like curling, things like, action sports, winter sports, things like that haven't always had a home on broadcast or cable television. But, I know that they have passionate, active, engaged audiences, younger fan bases, maybe than some of the traditional pro leagues. And so trying to test and fill out our programming schedule with additional rights. I never know, niche, emerging, never know the right term to call them, but they're powerful in their own right.
Yeah, especially when you start aggregating audiences from different regions, different parts, and these sports don't get that much attention, but the aggregation of all these small audiences, and they're so passionate and so loyal to the sport that they stick forever.
Yeah, I mean, you remember well, I'm sure, the kind of long tail sports, the niche sports program we had at Facebook, where we would aggregate these audiences in CrossFit and Ironman and World Surf League, and really digital savvy fan bases, global fan bases, content that hasn't been on TV historically. People are happy to have it on. It's always fun to kind of light up those audiences, because for a sport like that, you can give them their biggest viewership day in the history of their sports history. Like, we're never going to do that for the NFL or the NBA, but for triathlon or for curling, we can provide the distribution tools for a pretty big audience, which is exciting.
One thing that you mentioned that I thought it was very interesting on the three pillars, so international, women's, and niche. Women's sport, for me personally, and this is my personal opinion, is one of the biggest opportunities in the sport industry. If it's not, probably it's the biggest opportunity in the sport industry. Women's sport is the biggest opportunity if you want to invest in the sport industry, because there's so much that can be done.
Absolutely. I mean, we're seeing, even with some of our partners just the past few weeks, if you see the headlines, Athletes Unlimited is a women's pro sports league startup. They run softball, basketball, and volleyball. And Major League Baseball just invested in their softball league. So, the pinnacle of men's baseball, Major League Baseball is investing in this women's sports property. Similarly, I mentioned the Pro Women's Ice Hockey League, PWHL. It's grown leaps and bounds significantly the past few years. They've expanded to more cities. We're hoping they're going to expand to some more of our markets so we can add some more deals with their teams. But the activity there, the viewership, the consumption, the demographics of the audience has really been staggering to watch. WNBA expanding to more cities announced last week. The momentum is really, really fantastic.
Yeah, the momentum is there also because in a sport industry that is now going through a transition moment, because the traditional business, media rights business, is under stress, to say it in a nice way.
Yeah.
You're looking for areas to grow. Professional sport has historically ignored 50% of the population.
Yeah.
And that opens up the biggest growth driver that you can imagine in a world where media rights revenue it's not anymore the growing business.
That's right.
It's a huge business, but it's not anymore growing.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, I think in the US, which again is, like we talked about, is a little bit of a unique market, the trajectory of women's college sport, of the WNBA, of some of these properties has really been exceptional. And, they're getting included in the NBA's new media deals, and they're going to have more exposure on national platforms, and Amazon's now bought into the WNBA. I clearly, sample size of one, I have kids growing up 11 and 13 years old, and they watch the WNBA more than the NBA. They're transfixed by the storylines. We've got a team here. We go to games. It's much more accessible to have an experience going to the Liberty game versus a Knicks game, price point wise. And it's just an unbelievable quality of play. And you're seeing also, like, the business side become a lot more savvy. They know they need to reach audiences. They're doing smart media deals. I mean, this is a debate we could have forever, like reach versus revenue. And, trying to find the biggest platforms for the biggest audiences. I think they're doing a good job of reaching fans where they are.
It's true that it's also they have more flexibility because if you look at legacy, let's call it legacy. It's not legacy, but if you look at the big leagues, their ability to innovate, it's very limited by the huge media rights deals that they have.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, obviously, if you're making billions of dollars from media rights, you're going to be generally happy with that situation. But it does limit in scope the ability to do things digitally, socially, in-game highlights, things like that to engage with fans. And a lot of the deals that you and I have just talked about, the new things I'm adding, a lot of them are non-exclusive.
Yeah.
Because it's good for our networks to have the content, but we also I know from my experience that we don't compete with a YouTube or an Instagram. It's different audiences. And for properties, it's really important to be able to, yes, be on traditional television and be next to an NBA game and have great cross promotion, but also to reach that fan wherever they are, whether that is on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, whatever it is. And so, the industry I'm in has traditionally relied on exclusivity and very tight control by the media partner of rights. And, yes, that still exists to some extent at the top end, but we're trying to be more flexible, kind of in the middle to, reach fans where they are.
And how are you balancing this? Because you FanDuel is mainly TV. It's the aggregation of many TV channels in different territories. How you balance the digital strategy that doesn't have regions to the regional distribution of the TV channels?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the regional distribution, limiting a team or a channel to one market, one state is kind of a legacy media hurdle. It's something that the league set up a long time ago so that teams kind of had a protected area to market the club, to sell tickets, to sell sponsorships. But a lot of these deals that we're doing now break that mold. So, for example, the Women's Hockey League that I mentioned, the PWHL, we have rights to the team in Minnesota, but they let us show those games across our entire network footprint. They don't just say you're limited to one state like an NHL team might, because they know it's only beneficial for the league to have national distribution for those games, both on our channels and they are on YouTube as well. So they're just trying to be as wide as possible. So it takes some foresight from the league and some flexibility from the media partner to be able to say, we both can see the benefits here. We want wide distribution. And then we know you guys also need to reach fans in different ways. And we're going to be the exclusive television partner, but we're not going to warehouse the rights. We're not going to prevent you from being on digital and social platforms as well.
And when from a broadcaster perspective, from a media company perspective, where you're buying the content to distribute it and you're building your business model on third party content, let's put it in a way. How are you balancing on your media rights deals the need to have in sports is about live consumption. The most important thing is live, but we're seeing that how people are consuming sport is changing and highlights are becoming more and more important. How you balance now the exclusivities that you want on one side to the demands of the users on the other side?
Yeah, I think again, because I'm now at a legacy television business, we are still very focused on live. We make the majority of our ad sales revenue on, in-game live distribution of content. We do sell digitally as well, but it's a smaller focus. And we also don't want to restrict our league partners from monetizing those rights because, for emerging properties, tier 2 properties, we're not, the deals that we're doing are not going to, guarantee them, 7-8 figures of media revenue. And so we want them to have flexibility to be able to monetize their content in different ways. For us, we'd rather help amplify a partner's content, collaborate on digital and social, try to bring them partners who may want to sponsor their content. But for us as a kind of core linear television business, the focus is still that live window in many ways.
You said something interesting that you're monetizing the majority of the ads revenue goes on into the live, At the end, sport is the only thing that you cannot consume on demand. You need to be consumed live, and it's by appointment. It brings people together at a certain time and a certain moment in front
Yeah.
of the TV. But and you know this from your time at Meta, the way the ad products in the digital platform are built are not made for are not meant to monetize effectively live.
Right. That's right.
Because you have the short period of time where you need to deliver the ads and you don't have the inventory. So it's really two models that can live complementary.
Exactly. So the television business, live is still the driver of monetization. And then again, for us, digital social is secondary. But if I was a property, if I was sitting in the chair of a property, you know, live, you want to be everywhere. You want to reach the largest audience you can. You want to meet people where they are, be on all the platforms. It's really hard to get people to download yet another app, sign up for yet another subscription. And so I know there's challenges with who owns the audience and data, and how do you find people on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, et cetera. But they're the broadest, biggest marketing funnels out there. And yeah, you have to have this mindset shift of, I'm giving away the live. I am not monetizing the live, but then having a really robust digital content strategy of clips, highlights, sportainment. I think from our time there, right, the biggest things that drove 1 minute views, monetizable views, was never the highlights. It was funny things that happened, or it was, football players playing basketball, or, cross sport promos and things like that, things in the crowd that happened. And so you have to look at, yes, the on field action, but the game around the game, and try to drive your monetization that way. And I know it's such a mindset shift, but if I remember right, when we acquired rights at Facebook, Champions League, La Liga, we didn't have a live ads tool even built yet.
I think it's not there.
It may still not
It's
be
still not there.
7 years later, however long ago that was. So, it's such a radical shift where live is the only thing, or the primary thing. You're still driving value for television and for sponsorship and advertising on TV, but you have to really have a progressive shift for digital distribution, where the live is the carrot, it's the hook. You give it away for free. It's great if you can have sponsorship in it, but you're not selling it the same way. And then you really monetize, post highlights, have a good content calendar throughout the week to keep people engaged, drive your other business goals, ticket sales, merchandise, signups, etc. All the things we used to try to get partners to do still hold.
Yeah. And on you mentioned the game around the game, and from coming into a traditional media business where maybe people are used to do things in a certain way, or focus more on pure the sport aspect because they've been doing it that way for years, and they know how it's done and how the product is delivered. But now everything is changing so fast. How you balance from a content strategy perspective, how you balancing the entertainment versus the pure sports?
Yeah, I think it's so what I've found kind of the past few years being back more in American sport is, you have to be very intentional, and you have to be focused on what works for that particular league or property. And, a great example of that would be, there's a lot of kind of fashion overlap in the NBA, and, players coming to the arena, how they're dressed, the pre-game walk-ins. And so there's a lot of, great content that you can create out of that. You can feature it in, the pregame shows, the live game. You can package it up. And we've done some digital content series and in-game features around player fashion. But for a sport like baseball or hockey, that might be the completely wrong thing to do. You have to kind of find what works for that individual sport. You can't just say, okay, fashion works for everything because it works for the NBA. And I think it's a little bit easier with some of the niche emerging properties. A sport like curling, they're having a lot of fun. We just aired an all-star special from Grand Slam of Curling a few weeks ago. It's a really fun show. There's a lot of kind of, I'd say it's sport, but it's very much like a party on ice, kind of.
Yeah.
And so that's a little easier to have fun and clip and do some things digitally and social. But, versus an NBA telecast that's a little more traditional. I mean, another great example is we did a deal with Overtime, the startup basketball league. We are top prospects here in the US, and they really have grown their business, on digital and social. And we did a deal for their Overtime Elite basketball games. And I got a call from somebody here saying, why is the coach wearing a camera on his head? Like, this feed is very shaky. What is this?
Yeah.
I was like, well, yeah, this is different. It's not the NBA, but this is kind of, content that's being shot for Instagram and for digital. And yes, we're putting it on TV, and maybe that looks a little different than what we're used to for a basketball game, but it's a different way of presenting a sport. They're not the NBA. They're trying to do things differently. So I've had some interesting experiences kind of trying to fit new types of sports, new types of production, new types of content onto traditional networks in some
But
places.
if you look at the direction the industry is taking, it's going all into that direction. Look at what FIFA is doing with the FIFA World Cup. There have been a lot of innovation. The two biggest innovation I'll say is the first time FIFA goes with a global partner
Yeah.
with the zone. And then I love the referees cam.
Yeah.
The ref cam, it's amazing. The point of view, it's, as you said, shaky, not traditional, maybe not what a purist from a TV production perspective will like, but it's the angle that the audience is looking for.
Great for the fans, great for digital social, great for everything. I mean, it's amazing to see them test that. But yeah, I'm sure somebody got a phone call, kind of like I did. Like, what is this? What is this shaky camera we're putting out? But that's what works these days. Try new things.
Yeah, and another thing that is changing a lot is the work that it's been developing around content creators. I think that's huge. And going back to the zone and FIFA, if you see how they've been proposing the content with the journalists and the projects taking, it's been quite different to what they usually do. I think I found it very, very refreshing. How are you guys working with content creators?
Yeah, it's been interesting. So we've tried to, because we've had regional networks, we haven't really had a face of our networks. We haven't had sort of identifiable big personalities that we've had. If you lived in Miami, you knew your local broadcaster, your local sideline reporter, but we haven't had kind of a talent creator strategy until recently. We've added some new shows on our networks with Kay Adams, Michelle Beadle, some U.S. media talent that are part of the FanDuel family, and they've been really great. But then we've also seen some growth from some of our broadcasters and sideline reporters. I'll shout out, there's a guy named Nick Gallo, who's the sideline reporter for the Oklahoma City Thunder, NBA champions. It's one of our teams. And he's become a really kind of key asset in terms of post-game player interviews. They get all sorts, they do all these kind of crazy stunts and things, and you can look for clips of players like putting towels on his head and having fun with it. And so, we're starting to see a little bit more the personalities come out from some of our team partners, from some of our broadcasts. We're definitely a long way from, what we used to do at Meta, where we'd put live rights on a public figure, athlete, personalities page. I think to this day, right, the biggest live stream in Facebook history is still that Champions League final from 2020. It was on Neymar's Facebook page in Brazil. It's like 7 million concurrents, if I remember correctly. Like we are, as a kind of US television broadcaster, we're not at that point yet, but we are using our talent, our broadcasters, our kind of shoulder programming show hosts to better distribute our content and tell our stories.
And also not only to better distribute the content and tell your stories, but produce dedicated content for digital.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, our teams, we produce tons of content for digital only, behind the scenes, things that aren't going to make it on air. Each market has their own pre and post game shows, and there's digital content that comes out of that. And so we've got different social feeds, different handles, some national, some regional, different talent that do different things for us.
And in terms of interaction and how you engage with the audience, because this has been always being a big topic, and everyone talks about fan engagement, but I think so far no one has got it right, the fan engagement piece. When we were at Meta, we had a lot of research that was saying that people that were engaging with the content somehow, doing a comment or interacting in polls and everything, stick for longer. So it was a way to retain the user longer. How are you thinking about that fan engagement strategy at FanDuel?
Yeah, so we're I'd say a couple different things. One is we're trying to make our broadcasts themselves more interactive. There's certain restrictions state by state in terms of what you can do
Yeah.
as it relates to gaming, but more stat heavy, more gaming, more interactivity. Now that's on the television side, so it's not the same, polling, commenting that we had at Facebook. So on the digital side, we try to have a fun voice. We try to, engage with people in real time during the telecast. But because our live rights are not, um, on as interactive a platform as a social media channel, we don't do quite as in depth as we used to. If I remember right, somebody comments they're going to watch 5 times longer, or votes in a
Yep.
poll we're going to watch significantly longer. Our streaming metrics are significant. People watching essentially whole games on whatever device they're choosing, either mobile or smart TV. But we don't have that full interactive layer yet that we used to at Facebook.
And how big is connected TV compared to the traditional one? Because it's a market that it's growing a lot.
Yeah, connected TV has really been. I'm not sure how big it is in Europe, but in the U.S. it's been absolutely massive the past few years. The growth, both in terms of fast channels, but then also just people authenticating,
Mm.
watching our app through smart TV providers is a significant amount of consumption. I think traditional TV still leads the way, but those numbers are getting close in terms of consumption.
And from a company perspective, how are you balancing the investment on the streaming side versus the traditional?
Yeah, our traditional kind of production and infrastructure is in a great place, and we've got the rights deals for all of our teams. We have our distribution deals. This season is the first year we've had the streaming rights for all of our pro teams. So there's a lot of investment and focus in our product, and in growing the direct consumer subscriber base. So we've put out some numbers publicly that after the start of the baseball season, we were at over 650,000 subscribers, on track for 1 million, which is a decent start for our direct consumer business. In the first season of having the team rights, we've had to rework a bunch of different deals to get those. So yeah, the television business kind of runs as it is. We're doing some production innovation, centralizing, changing some things, but really there's a lot of investment in digital and streaming, and what the future looks like, because we think there's an opportunity there. We think there's an opportunity to probably white label our business, our product, our service for other providers, other teams. So there's a lot of focus on what the future is for the streaming side of the business.
When you said that you needed to rework a lot of those deals, I'm curious to know how were those conversations.
It's interesting. Each league is very different in terms of how they view certain rights. Some are easier to deal with than others. We had the streaming rights for the NBA and the NHL last year. So MLB baseball was the last one to come on board this year. Look, a lot of the stuff is public. Baseball wants to build their own streaming service and have the clubs on it. And so they were reluctant maybe in the past to give those rights up to a third party, but able to work things out. And I think, you talk about reach, revenue. I think our offering is pretty compelling because we're paying good rights fees to these clubs, and we've got established channels and audiences. And in a lot of the markets that we're in, we are the number one sports channel. We beat ESPN most nights because people are watching their local team, not the national telecast. So, for example, if the Miami Heat are on in Miami, but ESPN's NBA game is, I don't know, Milwaukee versus Chicago, people are watching their local team in Miami. So I think we have a pretty compelling business. But yeah, the negotiations are negotiations, and things get worked out. Look, I'm sure just like in Europe, everybody's trying to figure out what the next 5, 10 years hold. You know, 10 years ago, right? Facebook had never bought sports rights. Netflix had never bought sports rights. And Amazon was just getting into the business app. Like, so you think 5, 10 years from now, who are going to be the future players? Nobody wants to kind of lock up their rights long term, 10, 20 years, because they want flexibility. Um, and so, yeah, we're all trying to figure it out, both sides.
If you look at the media rights, sports media right landscape in the US versus Europe, at least in the US, you have a much clearer picture
Yeah.
because the top four leagues, NFL, NBA, NHL, and MLB, they have still long-term deals. Where when you look to Europe, it's a completely different picture. You have Serie A renewing in 2 years, I think. No, Serie A is a little bit longer. La Liga is in 2 years. The cycle ends. You have Serie A with 4 more years. Look at what's happening in France, which probably is is the first major sport property that is failing. Let's say or it's on the risk to fail.
Yeah.
Um, so that transition and that conversation that it's happening into the industry, you have a much clearer picture in the US compared to some international markets.
Yeah, you do. I mean, I having worked most of my career in the US, it's always kind of been strange. Obviously, different countries, different governmental regulations, different restrictions, but a 3-year rights cycle is really hard. It's hard for the property to have certainty. It's hard for the broadcast partner to build a business. Um, I know this is a lot more regulated, but just the way that the Premier League, right, with the blackouts, the 3 p.m. My old colleagues at Wasserman used to do those deals, and they kept having to increase the amount of games in each package to kind of increase the rights values. Uh, it's really hard, and as a kind of, again, a big fan of European football and the Champions League. The Champions League was the dominant property here in the States when I was growing up. And it was on ESPN, and they got great coverage, and they had live Wednesday afternoons, and this was the 90s and then into the 2000s, and these great teams in Manchester United, Real Madrid. And then the rights started to bounce around every few years, and it went from ESPN to Fox to Turner to CBS. Meanwhile, the Premier League did a long-term deal with NBC, and I think has been with NBC now for 12 years through 2 or 3 different cycles. And the Premier League has now become the European football property in the US with that consistency of a media partner. And the Champions League, still massive, still obviously the final does well and the matchups do well, but with those short-term deals, and Fox could never quite build it. Turner gave it up early. CBS has it now. You have to be really thoughtful as a property or as a sales agency of, what am I building for the long term here? Sometimes longevity with a partner is important. Consistency is important to build a fan base versus bouncing around every few years.
But I think the way the business and the incentives were designed in the last few years, we were in a time where media rights, no matter which property, were always growing.
Yeah.
At the end, you have these agencies trying to maximize their commission, so they were looking for the biggest check, not necessarily the biggest deal long term. Now, sports leagues are becoming more and more professional and more digital savvy, and starting to think about the branding, thinking about what's the future is going to look like in 10 to 20 years. Who are my fans? And all those things are taken into consideration, whether before it was maybe just the revenue.
Yeah,
Number
right.
ever.
I mean, I'm really curious. Like, I'm watching, what are the next sports to come out of Europe or Asia or anywhere to the US? Obviously, football is massive. Formula One has grown significantly the past few years. The Netflix effect, whatever that might be. There's rumors now Apple's bidding for the rights in the US, which if you go from ESPN to Apple, that's a massive drop in audience. Again, I'm not involved in that. That's just kind of rumored, but it'd be interesting to see what happens there. I went to the Cricket World Cup last year when it was in New York, and they had the tournament here, and could there be, kind of a cricket explosion? There's great cricket series on Amazon, the tests, things like that. Could there be a growth here? It's similar to baseball. I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of waiting to see, is there some other property? Are there other things that come out of Europe that really take hold here in the United States the way soccer, football has, and the way F1 has, over the past decade. So that's the most fun part of all this. The kind of world we work in, I think, is, you know, doing deals in different regions, finding sports from different regions, lighting up content different places. And so, yeah, the smart properties they're thinking about, where's my fan base? Where's the growth? How do I distribute? How do I tap into this market in a smart way? And not just, bury my content behind a paywall because somebody gives me a small check. You have to be really thoughtful about it.
Yeah, I love that you say football and not soccer. I think that tells refers to the thing that I was saying before, that you're one of the few persons in the US understanding international sports, and this being a long argument of discussion with
That's right.
at our time when we were working together at Meta. Um, it's true that football has taken some ground here, but I have the impression, talking to different football clubs, talking to 3 different football leagues, that the US, it's like the holy grail. Like, they want to get there, they want to crack the US market, but there's no football property that has really cracked the market in the way. What do you think that's the case?
Yeah. So this stat used to be true. I'm not sure if it's true now, but I'm gonna say it. But the most watched league in the U.S., I was told, was Liga MX, and that's just because of the Hispanic audience and the population of the United States. But that's kind of a regional, obviously neighbor league.
That's Liga MX. Sorry to interrupt, but Liga MX is the only league in the world where an international market's media rights is more valuable than the domestic. The only one in the world. This Liga MX makes more money from their broadcast deal in the US than the broadcast deals they have in Mexico. If you look at the Premier League,
Right.
aggregated revenue of the Premier League in media rights, it's, I think, 6 billion. 3 billion come from the UK. In Spain, La Liga, the same. 50-60% of the revenue comes from the domestic country. The Liga MX is the only football league in the world that has more revenue from an international market than from the domestic one.
That's interesting. Yeah, and maybe the most watched league in the U.S. And there you get some like classic New York sirens in the background for the podcast for this segment. But no, I think what I've seen, again, being a consumer fan in the business for 30 plus years, is fans here love tradition and they love big clubs. And so a lot of the big clubs have, they've made inroads, they do summer tours, but people also like authenticity. They want to go to Anfield, they want to go to the Bernabeu. They don't love the kind of the fake football that we get in the summer and the C team. And so it's kind of a cultural thing to follow, but people want to make that pilgrimage, but only so many people can actually do it. I think what's evolved, that probably the data from Facebook, Instagram, and everywhere else supports, is that it's now a player focus. So it was a tradition following a club, picking a club, but now it's about the players. And so, I took my kids to Real Madrid. Do they even know who Real Madrid is? No, they just want to see Mbappe. They want to see Bellingham. They don't care who he's playing for. And so I think the players becoming icons, becoming social media superstars, like, that's obviously not unique to football. It's kind of what's happened in every sport where the athletes are bigger than the league or the teams themselves. But, it's hard for a football league or a club to grow in America because the transient nature of the players. And so I know a lot of the American players are playing in Serie A right now, and Pulisic in Milan and others, and they're kind of hoping, is this a moment where that league can gain some more traction in the US? Maybe. But if those players leave, what are you selling? You kind of have to then lean back on the tradition of the clubs and the culture of Italy and, a lot of the marketing that they do. But it's really hard. It's really hard. But I think the European leagues have such a leg up on MLS because, they're playing in the mornings. It's a great time slot for us. It's much easier for a lot of people to consume games in the morning or the afternoons versus, Major League Soccer's head-to-head prime time against other U.S. sports. It's a great in-stadium spectator experience, but it's a really crowded media calendar. They're competing against a lot of other pro sports properties on television, and the audiences, haven't grown.
Yeah, because the calendar of US sports, it's crazy. You don't have a single day where nothing is going on. Like, you don't get a rest.
The only day of the year there's no pro game is next week. It's the day after the Major League Baseball All-Star game. As the only day there's not a pro sports game. So 364 days a year, there's always something going on. So yeah, it's a crowded calendar. And so I admire, what a lot of the leagues have done coming from, other countries, other territories. I mean, even F1 with races, in Asia, crazy time slot. They're getting great numbers for morning races, late night races here in the US. They've done a good job marketing the athletes, the stories, the rivalries. Kind of the playbook for football is in some ways similar to F1 or other international properties. It's selling the locations, the heritage, the rivalries. You want to be part of something like that.
Well, in these last, I'll say 3 years, I think the football industry has made a huge effort in trying to crack the US market. And if it doesn't crack it now, I think it's going to be very hard to crack it, because when are you going to align three main
Yeah.
milestones, I'd say? Bringing arguably the biggest football player in history to play in the US with Messi, and the Messi effect and all that, and all that, what that brought. Do the first Clubs World Cup in history in the US, and next year with the big event, bringing the biggest event in sports to the US with the FIFA World Cup.
Yeah, it's a great moment. And, I was a kid, I was 12 years old in 1994 when World Cup came for the first time. And so, if there's momentum for next year to grow fandom and increase viewership, like now is the time. It is kind of amazing how, and the Women's World Cup coming in 2031,
Yeah,
a few years later. I forgot about it was going to be 27, but I think they spaced it out a little bit. That's in Brazil now. So yeah, it's a great time to be in this business in the US with all the football coming and the international sport coming. It's gonna be really fascinating.
I think what we need is invest more in developing the talent in the US, because the US audience is, I think that goes back to the culture and the American dream. And you are, as a country, or as a culture, you're a culture that like heroes and like superstars. And you said it before, we're missing that big personality that brings that drives audience to football. You have in the women NBA with Caitlin Carr. You have it in the NBA with many players, but we can pick now LeBron as the as the biggest star. But we're missing a big US player that really drive those audiences.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's the dream. And the women's side has been very successful. You've had Alex Morgan. I mean, going back, you had Mia Hamm. You had this whole generation. But yeah, on the men's side, it hasn't quite happened. I mean, I followed them all. John Harkes, Landon Donovan, players that had good careers abroad,
Of course,
have never kind of had the success on the world stage. Pulisic, let's see what happens next summer. Maybe they make a run. Not super optimistic, but from a business side, this team has such an opportunity, to really become America's team, to really show on the world stage, and hopefully they're ready to capitalize on that.
I'm very curious to the World Cup next year for two reasons. First, because it's going to be the first not the first time, because we have Korea and Japan, but where you have, the organization across three countries, that's always a bit a big challenge, and an approach that FIFA is taking to the World Cup in 2030 between Spain, Portugal, and Morocco. So I kind of like to see how that plays out. And also because the first memory I have from a World Cup is that 94 World Cup that you remember. I was born in '88. I was 6 years old, and I remember the '94 World Cup as one of the first memories I have from football.
Amazing.
That final with Roberto Baggio missing the penalty against
Brazil.
Brazil. I think that has been one of the most brutal moments in football history.
Yeah, we've all missed penalties, but not on that stage. Yeah, amazing.
Hopefully Italy made it to the World Cup.
I know. It's more fun when they're the big teams, and yeah,
We need to have all the big teams and the big heroes. And I'll be cheering for the US because
appreciate it.
we need the US market. Football needs the US market, and I think the US market needs football.
Yeah, it only would help all of us, trying to grow this business, trying to grow new leagues, new properties, whether that's men's, women's, international. Yeah, there's gonna be a ton of interest, and again, on the media side, Fox has the rights. That deal's done. The Women's World Cup the next year, 27, Netflix has the rights. So it'll be kind of an interesting experiment for FIFA with a streamer owning not just the Club World Cup like DAZN has now, but Netflix having the Women's World Cup rights here. So there's a lot of kind of interesting business subplots to watch for the men's and women's World Cups the next few years.
It's interesting that you mentioned it before. You're trying to build your female sport vertical. We're seeing a lot of innovation in female sports. We talk about, I really believe that it's the biggest opportunity in sports. Look at what Netflix is doing. We're gonna have the biggest, probably when we publish this episode, it will be gone. But in 2 days, we're going to have the biggest women boxing event in history, with Netflix broadcasting it worldwide. The biggest paycheck for the fighters. They're betting also on the women's media right. Everywhere you look, you see this momentum.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to see the numbers that they get this week. I mean, we know combat sports is massive. I think number 2 globally behind football in terms of fandom from our Facebook, Instagram days. And some of the numbers they've gotten for the past bouts have been incredible. It's amazing the platform stays up with that much, concurrent viewers and streaming and consumption. We know how that goes sometimes. So, I mean, look, what I mean, they could do 50 million concurrents this weekend. I don't know. I mean, they did what, 65
for the last one, for the Jake Paul Tyson.
So be amazing to see.
It'll be amazing. It'll be amazing. I'm so excited about women's sports in general that I don't get tired of repeating myself. It's by far the biggest opportunity in the sport industry.
Agreed.
By far. No, for me, there's no doubt. And going back a little bit to the strategy of Netflix, because one thing that they've been doing very good is developing their own events. We saw that with the Alcaraz Nadal event in Vegas. At FanDuel, are you thinking about that model a little bit? Because you're so tied also to have a deeper connection to the territory. So that gives you a visibility over things that are going on in certain regions or certain areas of the country that, can drive to new opportunities.
Yeah, look, I think, first off, that strategy is very smart because you're creating IP in events you own, and you don't have to license, and you don't have to worry about losing. So certainly, we've thought about different things, everything from kind of creating events. Before FanDuel had the naming rights to our company, it was the Fox Sports regional networks, and we had a lot of high school sports rights, which are big in the U.S. And we thought about, can we create a national championship of high school football, and using the champions from our different states. We can't do that anymore because of gaming restrictions and age limits and underage athletes. But we looked at things like that. We've also thought about, I mentioned Major League Baseball and Athletes Unlimited equity positions and properties, and are there deeper ways for us to work with partners and, take ownership of events or participate in upside? And we're open to all different types of models, particularly for emerging niche sports. We want to make bets on what's the next thing that's gonna pop here in the United States. And the U.S. again has a lot of sports that maybe don't resonate quite as well internationally, but things like lacrosse, things like water polo, kind of collegiate type of sports here, but have had very successful pro league launches. So yeah, we're absolutely, we'd like to kind of get into that model of either creating or owning or having equity in different types of things, because it's more interesting, and then we can kind of shape how we do things.
What makes you excited about the future of the sport industry?
I not to date myself, but as a kid, like I mentioned, there was one Premier League game a week, tape delayed. I'd have to record it on a VCR and watch it. And now, no matter where you are in the world, you can access whatever content you want at any time on any device. And so what I'm really excited about is future consumption habits, what's going to look like for my kids and their kids growing up, how they're going to be able to interact more closely with the athletes and the teams that they care about. I'm also extremely passionate about athletes becoming distribution channels. This is something we push for so hard at Meta Facebook. And I mentioned the Neymar example of literally using his Facebook page as a distribution channel. Obviously rights are tied up and legacy deals don't always allow for that, but seeing athletes become owners of IP, I've seen some examples of this where a streamer buys rights or partners with a broadcaster. That model is really exciting for me to try to explore and try to redo deals or do new deals or create totally new categories, because putting athletes and creators at the center of not just short form content, but of like the core live rights to sport is a different model. And that's really, really exciting, to me, because yeah, we all grew up watching this stuff. We all grew up wanting to be these athletes or, get an autograph. And now just the way you can interact digitally and consume content directly from the property or the person that you care about is really exciting. I think we've only scratched the surface there.
I totally agree with you that we're only scratching the face. I always use this quote from Sir Alex Ferguson that always said that there's no athlete bigger than the club. There's no football player bigger than the club. But when you look at social media, it's not true. That's not true anymore. And for me, the example that better illustrates this is in a city like Madrid, with all the football traditions you have in Madrid, with Real Madrid, Atletico, Getafe, Rayo Vallecano, with many teams. If you tell me 10 years ago that I will see kids wearing Al Nassr shirts, I would tell you you're crazy. And now the amount of kids that you see wearing Al Nassr shirt, it's incredible.
Yeah.
So that's totally the
Different.
future.
That's the evolution. And I mean, to my point too, didn't Ronaldo stream a padel event? Like,
Yeah.
there's cross promote, like it doesn't even have to be in the sport that the athlete plays. Like these athletes, these brands, these like they've got the distribution, they've got the audience to do really creative things. So that was something that I thought was pretty cool and interesting. And I love that kind of crossover and thought put into a distribution partnership.
Absolutely. Very interesting. So what time will tell. Ben, thank you so much for making the time, receiving us here in your offices in New York. And we'll repeat soon. We'll repeat soon this conversation.
Absolutely. Next time in Spanish.
Yes.